I'm NancyA.Bagranoff, the Dean of the Robbins School of Business, and I'm so pleased to see all of you here today. This should be a special treat for all of you. It was an idea of our Associate Dean, Richard Coughlin. We've been all thinking quite a bit about what we can do to help prepare you better for the job market and for success in your careers, and this is a piece of that. I do want to thank Alpha Kappa Psi for their support and their help in drawing some of you in. They've been great about helping us with that. So, as I was thinking about this event, I was thinking about, well, you know, I know it when I see it, professionalism, but how can I actually describe it? I know professional dress. I have on a black suit, and I decided to wear pearls and heels today, so I would be professionally dressed for about any occasion. But what does it really mean to be a professional? I did what anybody would do in trying to figure out what something is. I Googled it, and I looked at a source that you should never rely on, Wikipedia, and I found out that, you know, it's quality of work. It's quality of work, and it can be in any profession or trade or any skill set. You know, we've all seen people in very different kinds of jobs that we would walk away from and say, well, that person was really a professional. So what are those attributes? We may not know for sure, but I think at the end of today's program, you'll have a much better handle on that, because it's really important that you realize you're in a business school, and we want to have a culture here of professionalism. So we're going to help you with that. So I will be talking to you in a few minutes, but we're going to start off with Professor Jonathan Whitaker. I do want to tell you, you have a panel of faculty here, all of whom have had business experience, and that's something that just thrills me. We have faculty who have great academic pedigrees, they've gone to fabulous schools, they're terrific scholars and teachers, but the faculty that you're talking with today also have worked in business. I started my career at General Electric, and we've got some great companies represented here. So with that, I'm going to turn you over to Jonathan Whitaker. Thanks.
Thank you, Nancy. I want to start by taking you through a little bit of a mental exercise. So I want each of you to think about your ideal profession when you graduate from the Robbins School of Business in the next year or two. So some of you might be thinking about investment banking, others of you might be thinking about consulting, some of you might be thinking about marketing, others might be thinking about entrepreneurship or public service. But I want each of you to have the profession in your mind. Now I want you to think about something else. I want you to think in your mind of the top firm in that profession. So for those of you that are going into investment banking, maybe you're thinking about Goldman Sachs. For those of you that are going into consulting, maybe you're thinking about McKinsey. For those of you that are going into marketing, maybe you're thinking about Procter & Gamble. I want you to think about the very top firm in that profession. Now I want to ask you a third question. I want you to ask yourself how competitive you think it is to get a position at that firm. So your chosen industry, the best firm in that industry, and I want you to think about how competitive it might be to get that position. However competitive you think it is, it's probably actually more competitive than that. And let me give you a couple of stories with some factual examples. So those of you that are marketing majors, probably one of the best marketing firms on the planet is Procter & Gamble. Procter & Gamble has about 115,000 employees around the world, very small turnover, nobody wants to leave. They're growing slightly, so they hire about 5,000 employees per year. McKinsey, did I see you here? How many applications does Procter & Gamble get for those 5,000 positions every year? Over 10,000? Okay. So if Procter & Gamble were to get 10,000 applications for 5,000 positions, that would mean that you need to be in the top 50th percentile of those applicants in order to get a job. Can someone else give me another guess? How many applications does Procter & Gamble get for 5,000 positions around the world each year? In the white shirt?
I'd say 50,000.
Okay, 50,000. So if Procter & Gamble got 50,000 applications for 5,000 positions, that means that you would need to be in the top 10 percentile of applicants in order to get a position. In the pink shirt, what's your guess? 100,000. So if Procter & Gamble got 100,000 applications every year, you would need to be in the top 5 percentile in order to get a job at Procter & Gamble. In the green? 120,000? Oh, 20,000. Okay, so we're going the other direction now. If we got 20,000 applications, you'd have to be in the top 25%. Jean jacket? 30,000. Okay. You are all way, way, way too low. 700,000. 700,000 applications for 5,000 positions. So for those of you keeping score at home, if you're in the 99th percentile of applicants for Procter & Gamble, you're not good enough. You need to be in, these are actual numbers, you need to be in the 99th and a third percentile of applicants to be the last lucky person in the door. That's how competitive it is. Let me tell you one more story. When I used to work for A.T. Kearney, a large global consulting firm, I used to lead recruiting for A.T. Kearney at the University of Chicago. Even though I was a consultant, I led recruiting. I used to review 500 resumes a year. And the people submitting these resumes are not necessarily slackers. They're students at one of the top 5 business schools in the world. I used to review 500 resumes a year. I would select 20 people to interview in the first round. 20. Of those 20 people that interviewed in the first round, 7 would go on to the second round. Of those 7 that would interview in the second round, 3 would go on to the final round. Generally, 2 of those 3 people would get offers and accept offers. And of those 2 people, precisely 1 would last more than a year. So I'm talking about 500 resumes during the recruiting process that leads to 1 employee who's there for more than a year. For those of you keeping score at home, what is that? The top 0.2%? So if you're in the 99.7 percentile of applicants to A.T. Kearney, you're not good enough to stay there more than a year. You've got to be in the 99.8 percentile to be the 1 person that gets in the door and stays there. And now I want to talk about why professionalism is important. Unfortunately, our educational system is sometimes a little bit narrow-minded. If you're anything like me at 19 or 20 years old, you might be thinking that if you have a great GPA and you know how to wear a nice suit, that's enough. Don't you think something more than 5,000 of those 700,000 Procter & Gamble applicants have a good GPA and know how to wear a suit? In order to be the one of the 5,000 that gets in order to be the 1 person that stays more than a year at A.T. Kearney, you've got to have something more than that. Right? Your GPA is not enough, your nice suit is not enough, and what is part of what distinguishes you? It's professionalism that we're talking about today. It's not your GPA. The GPA we take as a given, right? I want more than that. Professionalism, as my colleagues are going to talk about in a few moments, starts not your senior year when you're getting ready for interviews. It starts now. It starts when you're a freshman. It starts when you're a sophomore. It starts when you sit in class. It starts when you email a professor. It starts with how you conduct yourself. I'm surprised by the number of students that don't recognize that what a lot of firms do when they come to campus, yes, you can post for an interview, but you should know that what firms are doing on the side is they're asking faculty in that field who the best students are, so the faculty can recommend the students and make it easier for the firms to identify who they want to interview in the first round. So when I'm going from 500 applicants at A.T. Kearney to 20 people that I want to talk with, I'm asking the strategy faculty at the University of Chicago who the best students are so that I can make my review process easier. And so think about that the next time that you interact with a professor, the next time you email them, the next time you walk into class. Like it or not, that professor is probably evaluating you not only for how you perform on their test, but they're evaluating your professionalism, and they're looking so that when a leading firm, when that firm you thought about at the beginning comes to interview on campus, the professor is going to be able to say, oh yeah, I really like you to talk with McKinsey. She's really sharp and she's really professional. Professionalism also makes an impact on your fellow students. Those of you that might be sophomores or juniors might know some seniors or maybe some recent graduates that have gone on to a great firm. When managing directors at those firms are thinking about coming to campus to recruit, you know who's giving them recommendations? Is that fellow student of yours that's a couple years ahead of you. And so the impression that you make on your fellow students is important because that's going to lead to a positive reference too, or not. And so my goal in the past few minutes has simply been to persuade you that professionalism is important and that it makes a real difference. And that if you want to achieve your aspirations, if you want to be in the industry that you pictured at the beginning, if you want to be with the firm that you pictured at the beginning, yes, you need to do well in school, but you need something else. And something else is what my colleagues are going to talk about. And so Nancy will have a little bit more there.
Thank you. So building a bit on what Professor Whitaker had to say, I'm going to tell you a couple of stories, but I'm first going to start and tell you about a couple of props that I brought with me. I've been looking at some old pictures and some papers that my family's kept over the years, and I recently came across this old little pamphlet from a company my grandfather had, and I was really surprised to see right inside the cover an article that says, would you hire yourself? Would you hire you? And guess what it was about? The very same things that we're talking about today. Professionalism. Would you hire you? Think about it. Sometimes we think about, from our own perspective, gosh, I sent in an application to Procter & Gamble, and I thought it looked pretty nice. You know, I felt good about it. And I thought I put my best foot forward. But think about the person at Procter & Gamble who is looking at all of those resumes, and how do they distinguish one person from another? Would you hire you? Actually, this is still timely. I know that because last week a book came out. Has anybody heard about this, The Startup of You? Startup of You is a book that just came out last week. It's written by Reid Hoffman, the co-founder and chairman of LinkedIn, a great tool for you for professionalism. And basically, it addresses the very same idea that my grandfather was talking about 60 years ago. Would you hire you? So let me give you 3 little stories that might make you think about whether you would hire you, or think about those professors that Professor Whitaker talked about in terms of recommending you. The first story is an experience I had last semester when I was asked to recommend students for study abroad. Lots of us get asked as faculty to recommend students for things. So I was really interested when I stopped and thought about the spectrum across those asks. At one end, a student emailed me this semester, the day before the applications were due, and said, hey, would you recommend me for a study abroad? And I really want to go to Spain. I think it's really nice there. At the other end of the spectrum was a student who last semester was in my class and said, I want to study abroad next semester. Would you be willing to recommend me? You will be getting a request for that in January, and I'd really appreciate it. I'm interested in going to X country because I think they have a great school there, and I know that I'll be able to study certain classes that I really care about and maybe practice some language skills. That same student, this semester, just before it was time to send it in, emailed me and said, you'll soon be getting a request from the study abroad office for the recommendation, and I hope you would still be willing to do that for me. I filled in the recommendation. I received a handwritten thank you note from that student, and I recently had a note from that student telling me that they'd been accepted at the school of their choice. Would you hire you? Would you recommend you? I recommended all the students for study abroad. They were all pretty good students. But if you asked me to pick a student that I would recommend for Procter & Gamble, or a student that I would really see stood out and made an impression on me, which one do you think I would pick? That's up to you. It's your choice as to which, how you behave. But I can tell you that, as Professor Whitaker said, every single thing that you do is noticed all the time, and it will matter to you at some point. So here's another story, an example. I recently went to New York, and I visited with a gentleman who was hiring an intern from the University of Richmond. He was looking at other schools too. And he said, Nancy, would you mind sitting down here? I want to have somebody show you something. And he had one of their employees bring in a stack of letters that he had received from students at the University of Richmond who were interested in applying for that internship. And just as with the study abroad requests, they were all over the place. There were some fabulous ones. I mean, really made us so proud, thrilled that these were our students who were being so professional in their applications. But there were others that weren't so good. So imagine that you have this really high GPA and you're getting ready to apply for an internship that you really, really want. You're going to write a cover letter. You're going to have a resume. Do you write it yourself and then send it off? Or do you have everybody you can think of look at it, proofread it, make sure you've spelled the Robbins School of Business correctly, make sure that if in their call, their position notice, they said inquiries or resumes should be addressed to, and they give you a name, then address it to that name. Don't send it to whom it may concern. All of these little details. I write a lot of things. I hardly ever send anything important off without having somebody review it. You reviewed something for me this week. I always have people read things that I'm about to send because we all make mistakes. It's very easy to do it. But if it's important to you to work at Procter & Gamble or to get one of these top jobs, you want to have your work reviewed. You want somebody to look at that resume. We've got a wonderful career development center over here. They're happy to do it. You want somebody to help you with that cover letter. You want to put your very best foot forward because you have worked really hard to earn that 3.5 GPA. Why would you ruin that with one mistake in a letter that you write? There's no point in that. So let me end with one more story, but this is a happy story. We did have Melanie Healy here last week, and wow, what an amazing person. 13th most powerful woman in business, according to Fortune magazine, and the president of North America of Procter & Gamble. Imagine the statistic behind that job. So she was here, and she was up in the Reynolds boardroom, and we had, I don't know, about 12 students there. And I was so proud to be the dean of the Robbins School of Business. When those students showed up, professionally dressed, very polite, sat down, took their seats, I opened the discussion, and the first question that a student asked was, so you sold Pringles today. Why did you do that? The second question a student asked, P&G has at least one product in 90% of all households. How do you intend to grow revenue going forward? Another student said, hey, you came from Brazil to the University of Richmond. How did it feel to be an international student at that time? All around the room, each student showed that they'd done their homework. They had researched her and they'd researched the company. So the next evening, I saw Melanie Healy and she said, Nancy, I want to tell you something. I came to the University of Richmond a couple years ago and I was in a meeting with a group of students. The difference between the students I saw in that boardroom and the students I saw a few years ago, amazing. Very different population. So yeah, it's going to be hard to compete to get those top jobs. But you have a lot of great skills and tools. And you're going to have a few more after you listen to some of our other speakers. Thank you.
Well, I have to admit I'm a little disappointed that all of you kept feeding Professor Whitaker such easy math problems. I was waiting for the one brave soul to say, what percentile would I have to be in if Procter & Gamble got 613,911 requests for employment? Well, when Richard first asked me if I would participate in this event, I said yes. Then I went back to my office and I sat down, started to think about what would I talk about? And it didn't immediately come to mind. And then I asked myself, why did I say yes? And I realized that was a legitimate question. Why did I say yes? And the reason I said yes was because Richard asked. I am hard put to give you the name of any professional colleague that is more impressive, that exhibits a stronger work ethic, that is more dedicated to his colleagues, cares more about his institution than Richard. And through his actions, he inspires others to take action. And I decided that is a great topic for a talk. Richard is a consummate professional. And it turns out, in my experience, that's actually pretty rare. As we've already heard, lots of people can wear nice suits or not so nice suits. And lots of people can speak or write in a professional tone. But finding people who truly behave like professionals is not very common at all. So it begs the question, what does it mean to behave like a professional? Well, there's obviously many factors, but to my mind, there are several things that speak to work ethic and how we interact with others. Regarding work ethic, one of the things I found is that professionals understand their roles and responsibilities, and they hold themselves accountable for delivering on them. You know, in some settings, we see the impact of a long tradition of professionalism. You know, look to medicine. You know, how often do we see doctors say something like, well, I'm off duty, or I can't justify dedicating any more time to this? No, we don't see that. What we see is dogged determination, not letting go of a problem until it is solved or there is no way to achieve success. They do not quit. They also discharge their duties, whatever they may be, properly in a timely manner. They don't procrastinate. They don't put things off to the last minute. That's why whenever someone says to a professor, I had to skip class today to study for my finance exam, so can I please take a makeup quiz? Our blood boils. Not because you're suggesting that our class is perhaps not as important as finance, but because we see that that is exhibiting a behavior that we will not serve you well in your professional career. Professionals are also self-starters. They don't wait to be told what to do. They know what they need to do, and they do it. So it may always be true that you have a boss. Remember that obedience will only get you just so far. At some point, if you want to be one of these top 1/10 of 1%, you have to own the job. You have to own success. And that gets me to the final thing that I want to talk about with respect to professional behavior as it relates to work ethic. When something happens, a mistake, an unintended outcome, a professional accepts ownership of that outcome. You don't see people shifting blame, offering excuses, or dwelling on the unfortunate outcome, stewing on it, letting it fester. They learn from mistakes. And if possible, they'll re-engage the problem and try to pull defeat or victory from the jaws of defeat. But that last item, taking ownership of bad outcomes, that's extremely hard to do. You know, it requires us to ask tough questions of ourselves. And harder still, when we're working in team environments, it sometimes requires us to ask hard questions of others. And that's not fun, because you have to do it if you want to achieve a culture of excellence. But it's very difficult. I remember the first time I had to confront a colleague. I was working at an insurance company at the time. It was a large-scale IT project. And this person's role was to put together algorithms that this computer would execute to process medical claims. And as these things were being developed and tested, they were performing terribly. So I had to do something about it. But it was not an easy thing to confront. This guy was 20 years older than me. You know, I've been raised by my parents to respect my elders, to not talk back This guy had gray hair. Gray! It was all I could do to call him George instead of Mr. Wakefield. And now I had to call him out on his performance. Was not looking forward to it. But what I realized was it was my own personal outlook that was going to drive how difficult it was to confront this problem. If I was nervous, if I got myself angry, if I approached this as something where I was criticizing someone, that I was going to punish someone, then that was going to be a very unpleasant encounter. If, on the other hand, I assumed that this person had the ability and the desire to improve, then this could be a very constructive discussion. And that's the approach I took. Turns out, it was not an awkward discussion at all. The algorithms this person was putting together were far more complicated than any of us had thought they would be at the time. And what he wanted to do was test them before sending them along to development. But we hadn't built that kind of time into the project plan. And so as a result, these things were going through, they were being developed, they were being tested, and then they were proving themselves to not work. We had to redo code, and we actually saved a lot of time just by confronting the problem and dealing with it. So keep in mind that as you get out there and you get the opportunity to work at these top firms, that you don't get many, if any, chances to recover from a tarnished reputation. So own success, own that job, hold yourself accountable. Because if you hold yourself accountable, you will never have those awkward discussions where someone is calling you out for not doing what you know you are capable to do. The final thing I want to talk about was interpersonal skills. And obviously there's more to good interpersonal skills than just being polite, respectful, making witty comments about the Ohio State football program. The way you interact with others impacts their perception of you. And one of the things I want to talk a little bit is about how we behave during conversations. What I find is that if I'm in a setting that's extremely competitive, lots of very smart people, very ambitious, big egos, it's easy to find people who will try to dominate a conversation and bloviate. Invariably, I find them to be the least effective and least impressive people in the organization. You should truly want to hear and understand what others have to say. It's by truly collaborating that good ideas are born. So whenever you're in a discussion, you're trying to find a balance. You don't want to dominate the conversation, because if you're doing all the talking, then you're not doing any listening. And depending on how long you go on, no one else is going to be doing any listening either. So you want to make sure there's a balance in the conversation. Now, having a professor stand here and tell you to talk a little less might seem a bit ironic. But at the same time, it's hard to have a discussion if the audience isn't prepared, which gets us to the next extreme. The other thing you don't want to do is defer. And as you first get out there, it's intimidating to get into a room filled with seasoned, experienced, hardworking, ambitious people. You might want to say something, but then you're thinking to yourself, oh my gosh, what if that's a stupid thing to say? What if everyone else in the room knows that that's a dumb question? Maybe I'm best off if I just shut my mouth, sit down, and be quiet. That is also a mistake, because if you're not talking, you're not contributing. That's one of the reasons why all your professors tell you simply showing up to class does not guarantee you a good class participation grade. That's just a necessary act, something you have to do in order to be able to participate. And that's what your goal is. When someone asks you a question or speaks to you, respond. But respond in a good way. You want to respond in a manner that shows that you're listening. And this can also be hard. One of our first instincts when we're talking about problems is to try to impress people by having an answer. Unfortunately, the first answer that comes to your mind, guess what? Probably isn't the best. So what you really want to do is, rather than trying to jump out with the first answer, engage that conversation. Show that you're listening. Show that not only do you have knowledge, but you can apply that knowledge in unique situations and in creative ways. Professional life is not like Jeopardy, right? People will be more impressed when you demonstrate your ability to think and discuss things from various angles than they will with your ability to knock out knee-jerk reactions. So That is far more impressive and will serve you far better in your professional careers. Thank you.
Well, the good news is a lot of what we're talking about this afternoon is already happening. It's happening right here at the Robbins School. So let me give you one good example. I had a student who was working for me, and I'd asked her to go out and find the date of introduction for 5 or 6 brands in both the US and Canada. So a research project I was working on, I needed to know exactly when those brands were first introduced in the US and Canada. And my expectation was we had an assignment, there's a due date, and so sometime either on or before that date, the answer would come back to me. And sure enough, it did. But what was interesting is in the communication of those dates, I learned that information that was readily available on the internet was either incomplete, inaccurate, or contradictory. And what this student did is actually went out and called those companies when there wasn't a telephone number available, emailed those companies, and got a response from every single one of them. And so what she presented to me was the exact dates as reported by Procter & Gamble and Unilever and Kimberly-Clark, on and on and on. And the reason I thought that was such an amazing example, so my reaction was, oh, this is phenomenal, this is wonderful. I'm just effusive in my praise. He said, well, what else did you expect me to do? I said, well, I'm not sure every student would have done that. That was pretty amazing that you went beyond. And the reason I think that's a great example of professionalism is it recognized that she felt like she was part of something bigger than herself. Could have easily said, hey, I'm a student, I'm a junior in college. If you really want these dates, you can go get them yourself. Right? I mean, that would have been legitimate. I couldn't find it on Wikipedia, therefore it must not exist. You got your dean using Wikipedia. I'm not sure what that says. But she easily could have done that. What's important to remember is that as a student at the Robbins School, University of Richmond, and one day when you graduate, simply because you are a business person, you are part of something that's bigger than yourself. And so as I started thinking about, very much like Steve was talking about, as I started thinking about what I was going to say, I happened to be up at 3 o'clock on Wednesday morning and was flipping channels and happened to run across an episode of Inside the Actor's Studio. And Billy Crystal was on, and he was talking about an opportunity that he had to act in a movie called Analyze This with Robert De Niro. How many of you have seen this movie? It's 1999, so I'm sure you probably didn't see it in the theater. You've seen it DVDs or heard about it, right? Talking about gray hair. There's some gray hair with the people there. What Crystal was describing is the process of working with De Niro for the first time. They had read the script together, and it worked out well, and they rehearsed a little bit, but these guys are professionals, so they come together. They filmed the first scene. And Crystal's a little nervous about this. How did I do? And he said, they finished filming, cut, they're standing there, and De Niro looks at him and he says, he's thinking, oh, gee whiz, he's going to say, where did you learn to act? What is this guy? You're a comedian. You got to learn some skills here. And De Niro says, look, if I'm not doing something right, or I need to do more of something or less, if I need to fix something, let me know. And suddenly Crystal's saying, here I am, I'm a comedian. And here's one of the greatest actors of our time asking me for advice. Like, oh man, what a great example, not only of humility, but of really understanding the profession and having a goal toward being excellent. So when we talk about a culture of excellence, a culture of professionalism, of having a place where you're instilled with that, where it just happens naturally, that's a good example of what we're talking about. 2 points I want to make. First of all, is to realize that as you're thinking about your job, continual improvement is always necessary. I think that's what De Niro was looking at. He always wanted to get better. There was an opportunity to learn from what he was doing, opportunity to do something better in the future. And so if you can think about that I've always got to be better at what I'm doing. And it's examples of people, so I thought it was really amazing. I would second everything that Steve said about Richard. There's still opportunity for him to get better. There's opportunity for me to get better. There's opportunity for all of us. In the initial conversations we had about having this discussion, the dean even described situations where she's had to learn. In becoming a dean, you become a professor, you become a faculty member, you become a dean, and what does it mean to be that? But always focusing on continual improvement is important. The second thing is to realize that you're never done. When I turn off my computer tonight, or Friday evening, or the end of the semester, or after you guys graduate, I'm never done. These guys are never done. I've never had a job where I've said, I got to the end, I'm done, I can finally stop. That's why you talk about interviewing people. You interview people for graduate school, interviewing people for the MBA program. It's important we talk about, do you have any work experience? It's a very different experience to say, yeah, I did a little part-time work, internship stuff, until you've had a situation where you're sitting at a desk and going, I'm going to do this for the rest of my life? That's when you understand what work's about. And that's when you realize this is something that's going to go on forever. And so I think, again, that's one of the things that De Niro exemplified in the way he approached his role. He's never done. There's always something more to learn. But most importantly, and this was mentioned earlier, time to start is now. Let me expand on that a little bit. As most things are in life, when you approach them, what you think initially is, oh, well, there's not very far between where I stand today and my goal. So I want to become a professional, therefore I need to do just the things that these people said. That sounds like a pretty finite list. I check off the things on the list and I'm there. So I stand here, professionalism stands there. You know, I can do that at any time because it's not that far. The reason it starts now is because, like most things, once you take the first step, there's what I call a chasm effect. It's that once you get into it, you realize how far it is. And it looked pretty close when you had me and professionalism as a topic, but what happens is it opens up dramatically. And you realize that there's so much more to learn. There's so much more that I could do. And it takes time because you do some things well and you get credit. You're rewarded. You're praised. Other times you say, yeah, I didn't do that so well. I need to learn how to do it. I come from a systems background, as with some of these folks here. And, you know, as a person who sometimes is more comfortable in front of computers, I had to sort of decide I'm going to force myself to learn how to be social, to learn how to have conversations, to talk with people. It's just kind of one of the deals that you've got to do. The dean mentioned, you know, being an accountant. You've got to force yourself in sometimes to do that as well. Sorry for telling stories on all you guys. It's easier than telling stories on me. So you're never done. You have to start now. Your goal is at some point you get somebody like Robert De Niro looking at you going, you are good. I will tell you one story. One quick story. When I was working at Accenture, back when it was called Anderson Consulting, I was a programmer. And every time you finished writing a program, you would go through a code review, which meant that you had to print off 7, 8, 9 copies of the program that you just written, go into a conference room with 8 or 9 people from different parts of the team, lay your code down, and then you go through it line by line. And I can tell you that was the most excruciating experience I had ever been through, because it was like they were looking at me and picking me apart. Where did he screw up here? What was wrong there? Why did you write it that way and not this? Why didn't you put more documentation in? This seems kind of, just killed me. And I thought, if I'm ever going to survive in this career, I got to find a way to make it through the code review, because as soon as I was done with that program, they handed me another one. And so what I did the next time I walked into a code review is I said, you know, it's not me on the table. It's not me that they're critiquing. It's not me that they're analyzing. It's code. And code needs to be good. Because in a system, one program, working or not, affects the entire system. When something shuts down and you don't get service, you don't go, oh, it's probably just one little program. It's fine. I mean, the majority of it works. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work, regardless of how big the piece is. So going back to this idea of recognizing that you're part of something bigger than yourself. There's a much greater whole. And of these other points that I've made before about realizing that you've got to continually improve. Think about the fact that you're never done. My approach really was based purely in self-preservation, but I think it worked out pretty well. What I said is when I walk in next time, when I put that code on the table, it's not me there. It's code, and as I said, code needs to be fixed. So my goal in that meeting is to find every problem that exists in that code. And the reason I knew there was problems with the code is because I knew who wrote it. I said, if I know that guy, there's something wrong with it. There's got to be something missing. There's got to be something that could be done better. And my job was to find it before somebody else. And I can't tell you how freeing that was. As opposed to saying, I'm going to walk in and become psychologically detached from the process so that I can emotionally survive the experience of my code being picked apart. Instead, I put myself into the role of editor, of critic, to find a way to make it better. Incidentally, this approach works well in roller coasters too. Anybody afraid of roller coasters? We got a bunch of daredevils. Okay, we got a couple here sitting in the front row. How about that? People afraid of roller coasters are sitting on the front row. Everybody else full of daredevils. Okay? So I'll talk to you guys. What I don't like roller coasters at all. And my daughter gets it from me. She talked about she went over to the King's Dominion and went on the Elmo or the Ernie roller coaster, and she said, yeah, it was really rough, Dad. It went like that. Oh, yeah, that's scary. Here's the thing. If you go on a roller coaster and you're afraid of roller coasters, what works for me is to try to make it go faster. Not to get off, not to say it needs to stop and I'm holding on, but to force it to say it's not going fast enough. That is to make it go even further. It's the same approach that I took with the code. That is, find a way to get into the process and make it better. Last thing I want to leave you with is something that I found on an HBR, Harvard Business Review website. It's very short. With some advice that a professional was giving to other people who are thinking about how to act professionally. So when you communicate with a client, you likely have on your game face and project a high degree of professionalism. Do you do the same with internal colleagues? Whether you're talking with your assistant, your boss, your colleagues at work, it pays to be thoughtful and articulate every time. When you ask a question, make sure it's a smart one. We heard examples of that. When you present an analysis, spend a few minutes thinking ahead about your key message, supporting details and follow-up or action items. This shows your team that you have respect for them and allows you to continually practice so you're ready for the real thing. It also shows those paying attention that you're smart, competent, and client ready. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for coming out on this evening. One of the challenges that I have is following four very smart people who have provided you, I think, with a lot of really good advice. So rather than focusing on the professional bit, I'm actually going to focus on the last two syllables of the word ism, right? Professionalism. Ism is added to the word professional to indicate something like a state or a condition. If you think about what Professor Raggio talked about in terms of stepping into the ledge, I would think of it as saying, I'm about to be affected by this condition called professionalism. But it is a choice that you make. It's a choice that each one of us makes on different schedules. We know that there's this chance we're going to be affected by professionalism, and I mean that in a positive sense. It's a set of choices that I'm going to adopt. I'm choosing then to be in that state. And you've heard from my colleagues that now's the time to make that choice. My bias is that I see you as decision makers. I see our lives as being made up of decision after decision after decision. Whether you want to go to work for a consulting firm, or for a manufacturing firm or a marketing firm. What I'd like you to think about is becoming a professional decision maker. From suffering from professionalism in all of the decisions that you make. And so what is a professional decision maker? Well, first, let me introduce a word that has not yet come up, and that's the opposite of professional. How many of you thought of amateur or something like that? Well, when we look at word origins between professional and amateur, we actually gain a lot of insight. The word professional, that root, profess, means to declare publicly. So imagine that you as a professional are declaring publicly that you're ready for what's about to hit you. You're embracing the idea that you're about to suffer from professionalism. And you're ready for that. If not, then perhaps you'll go through your life as an amateur. Now, the root of that word, the origin of that word, actually comes from amo, or to love. But what it means is you love a bunch of things and you're not very good at any of them, or not committed to any of them. If you go back in the word origin of amateur, what you're going to find is it's a synonym for dabbler. I dabble in this, and I dabble in this, and I dabble in this. Now, your college life is made up of dabbling in things. That's part of this experience. But at some point, you need to commit to becoming a professional and setting yourself on a course to make decisions according to the lines that others have already talked about today. I was 22 when I was hired on at the Pebble Beach Resorts in California. I had an office overlooking the Pacific Ocean there. But that was the window that was behind me. If I looked out the front door of my office at Pebble Beach, I saw the offices of 2 other sales managers. Call the first one Michael. Michael had been on the sales team at Pebble for 12 or 13 years by the time that I arrived. He was fairly young, but had built a nice book of business. We were responsible for getting other groups to bring their meetings to the resorts there. Michael's very typical day was to arrive around 9 o'clock, sometimes 9:15, sometimes 9:30, sometimes 10 o'clock. And he would be dressed about like I am when he got to the office. And he'd strip off his coat, and he'd hang it on the back of his chair, and he'd go play golf. Not with a client, usually with friends. Often they were friends that also worked at the Pebble Beach Resorts. This is how he spent his days, and I was observing this. Now, Jane, and that was her name, who sat in the office next to him, was very diligent about making a plan for each day. She had potential clients that she wanted to call. She had a number, a goal that she wanted to reach. She had new contacts that she was hoping would lead to business somewhere down the line. And she, most days, some days, sat in her office and made the calls according to her plan. 22-year-old, 3,000 miles from home in a brand new industry, faces a choice, a decision, maybe even a dilemma. Do I follow this path or do I follow this path? Well, if I've decided to be a professional, if I've decided that it's okay to suffer from professionalism, this is not a dilemma for me. Do you understand that? It only becomes a dilemma if I allow it to. So now I want to share a story with you about a young man that I met when he was 18 or 19, a student at Richmond, who started out working for us in the business school here. He was a student worker, and that's how I first got to know him. And then Matt actually took my course, the course I was teaching on business ethics as a sophomore, and I got to know him a little bit further, and we stayed in touch. And Matt was fast-tracking. He had a wonderful GPA and was professional at 19 or 20, as Stephen Lasher here in the room, right? I don't mean to embarrass Stephen, but Stephen is a wonderful example, and he knows Matt. I'm sorry to embarrass you, but there's a lot of really good things in what you're doing here. It reminds me of Matt. So I'm going to tell you this story because it can start at 18 or 19. 2 young men who've committed to doing that from the beginning, and it's already paying off for both of them. Well, as Matt went through after a summer internship at Jeffries, as he was making his way through his 4th year, almost exactly 18 months ago today, on a Saturday afternoon, I was at home in August, and he sent me the following email. Dr. Coggan, sorry to bother you on the weekend. I finally received the official word on Thursday from Big Bank in New York, and they've extended me an offer. I won't get the papers until next week. Over the past week, I've seriously been thinking about taking the offer from Harris Williams, a wonderful employer here in town, over the bank in New York. despite the whole world telling me I have to be in New York. And I responded to Matt. He went on to say, you know, it feels like a better fit at Harris Williams than it does at Jeffries. And I read between the lines, having known him for as long as I did, and I knew he'd already made the decision. This really wasn't a dilemma for him, but what I want to leave you with is the idea that he put himself in this position to have two wonderful offers from two really good firms and to be thoughtful about how he was going to progress through that because of all the things that he'd done at 18, at 19, at 20, at 21 years old. And I'll tell you right now, he's helping us connect to folks in New York, to folks in Richmond, and on and on. He's setting an example, one that he committed to at the age of 18. What I'm going to suggest to you is that if you're willing to suffer from professionalism, then a lot of the choices that you face day to day are made a lot easier. Because the kinds of things that seem to be a dilemma to you on a Thursday night or a Friday night, right, become less burdensome to you. The path is clearer. Now, maybe you don't all want to become consultants at McKinsey. Maybe you don't all aspire to the job at Procter & Gamble. But what we aspire to here is a culture of professionalism. And what that means is you have an obligation while you're here to assist us in that endeavor. One of the ironic things about this afternoon's session is that the people who probably need it most aren't present. Let's all recognize that. But let's also recognize that we have 1/10 of the Robbins School faculty here and more than 1/10 of the Robbins School students in the auditorium, in the same room, interested at the very least in this topic and maybe motivated to do something about it. So I'm going to end here in just a minute, and we're going to open it up to a discussion. We'll certainly entertain questions if you have specific questions about a dilemma that you're facing, some career-related item that you want us to discuss. We're happy to do that. But I also hope it can be a two-way conversation. Why don't you provide us some guidance about how to carry this conversation forward? Through the organizations that exist, care about this, through individuals that care a lot about it and want to do something about it, we're looking to you for guidance. But you do have 1/10 of the faculty here, and you have more than 1/10 of the students here. I'm going to suggest that it's critical mass for getting this conversation started. I'm really thrilled that you turned out this afternoon. We all see it as the start of a conversation, right? Inside the classroom, outside the classroom. And what will be the result of it if we're successful in raising the level of professionalism here? Better outcomes for you, better outcomes for the students behind us, and frankly, an ability to attract faculty at least as good as the ones we've hired here in the last 2 years. Faculty care about this. And the dean mentioned that. I mean, we want to help you raise your level of professionalism and find good outcomes for you. Thanks very much for your attention. I'm going to ask my colleagues to join me on the stage, and then we'll answer any questions that you might have. Appreciate you being here. Yes, sir.
So you've all sort of alluded to professionalism as a lifestyle, and I know one of you even can't exactly remember who specifically said that people will be watching everything you do. So how exactly do you be a professional and still live a life as work?
Part of it goes back to what Richard was just talking about. You need to think about what your internal values are and what you aspire to, and hopefully you can make all those things consistent. So let me ask you a question in return. If someone wasn't watching you, what would you do differently?
I don't know, really open present.
Okay.
Well, I wanted to bring up an experience I had last week that was kind of interesting to me. I was elected to a board, and I had been asked if I would be willing to serve, and I was kind of excited about it, but I didn't know who was on the nominations committee. It was the national board. And I did get elected. And later I found out that there were 2 people on that board that I had met and worked with, I don't know, 20 years ago, one of them 10 years ago. So different people at different times in my life, based on behavior I'd exhibited at that time, here I was today, they were willing to vote for me based on a past experience. Now, when we say people are going to watch what you do, it's not every single thing. Don't worry, you can have a life too. But certainly in your work environment, being timely, making the choice that Professor Coughlin talked about between those two extremes, the person who went out and played golf and the person who diligently put themselves to work. Those types of things are observed all the time, and they will follow you throughout your entire career.
Yeah, I would just add that there's a difference between being a professional and checking your personal life at the door. You can still have a fulfilling life and also work very hard and be very successful. So one of the things you have to keep in mind is, as Richard told his story, there is a fundamental distinction between being at work and working. You'd be surprised how much time people waste just by making poor choices about how they're going to use their time. You'd be surprised how much time people lose just by not jumping in and solving a problem, fixing it as soon as it emerges. I see more people waste time putting out fires that they could have dealt with before things exploded in their face. So it's the decisions you make that really are going to define how chaotic your life gets. No one's saying success is synonymous with being a workaholic.
I have a question. You spoke earlier about bringing up problems with your superiors. In your case, the conversation was pretty painless and they were very understanding. What do you do if your superior is not understanding the problem you present, and how do you go about any disagreement?
Very good question. I tend to avoid presenting problems in favor of offering forth solutions. What I've found is the quickest way to get cut off at the knees is to walk in and whine about something or complain about something that's broken. No one wants to hear it. There's so many things out there, problems that are so complex and hard to solve, everyone knows they're there. So simply pointing that out is not going to be well received. But if you can identify a problem and also have a way to solve it, then that is a very different conversation to have with someone, because you're not being critical.
My favorite definition of decision-making is that it's a search for good arguments. Right? That the best decision makers actually land on some reasonable justification for why the course of action they're pursuing is the right one. And what I would say to you is, if you're unable to have a conversation with a superior, somebody that's higher in the hierarchy than you, if you're not able to have a conversation with them about what are the winning arguments, in other words, if you can't have it in a way that you're offering a justification, a potential solution to a problem, and you can't get from them why that's not being pursued, then I think it is important to examine the culture. Is it a culture where winning arguments are pretty clearly articulated and logical, and they make sense, and you can see where the organization is headed? We provide guidance to students all the time, and I know Shelley Burns is in the room, she does too, that you've got to have a plan B for whatever that first career path is. Because if you run into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 folks who are really putting you in that position, then you need to examine the culture of the place. You need to figure out whether that makes sense for you to continue spending time there. And then you want to have some other opportunity that you can pursue outside of that. Please go ahead.
I know that a lot of us are, looking into internships and various opportunities at multiple companies, and I was just wondering, in your professional experience, you're often moving from one job to the next, and still have to want to maintain good relations with that past company, but you are moving on to what you see as a better opportunity. So how do you kind of handle that, moving on to a better opportunity, but maintaining strong relations to what you left behind?
I think in any situation, you want to make sure that, people talk about don't burn bridges, and that's easy to say. Part of being professional is dealing with people forthrightly. And if there's something that's not working out, so you talk about a plan, we got to have a plan B, just saying this is a better place for me to be. Instead, what I said is, there are other opportunities for me. And it was very clear from the beginning that for me, this was a potential down the line, and said, in terms of my interests, in terms of my values, in terms of where I'm going and how I see myself, it fit. And it made sense. And in fact, everybody in every job that I've left has been very supportive. And in fact, I've gotten recommendations from people from companies that I've left, people that have hired me before, because they frankly weren't excited that I was leaving, but it was the right thing for me to do. And so what you've got to decide, just like we're talking about, having a very clear sense of who you are and where you want to go, that you're not doing something rashly. You're not doing something that is vindictive, that you're just being flippant about it, but you're being very serious, and that you're realizing that at some point I may have to deal with this person again, and so I'm just going to deal with it directly and then move on. Does that help to answer the question?
Yeah, just kind of as we're going through this processes of applications, you want every place to think that they're your first choice, but inevitably you're going to have a first choice. So just kind of dealing with that.
Actually, I don't want to hog it, but I will give you an example. What's interesting about our industry, if you will, is that each of our areas, academic areas, is really small. There are not that many marketing faculty at U.S. institutions. I mean, it's in the few thousands. And when I go to conferences, the people that I talk to most often are folks that didn't give me a job. So you talk about having many opportunities, and some of these people aren't going to give you jobs. But I get a really warm reception when I go to those folks. Sometimes they feel bad that, something didn't work out or whatever, and I try to emphasize that. You remember, you guys didn't even give me an offer, right? So.
Worked out all right, wait.
I was just going to say that each one of these 4 faculty members has all kinds of job opportunities all the time. And if any one of them came to me and said, I really love it here, but I have this opportunity and I've decided that it fits best for me and my family and I want to go pursue it, I would be heartbroken because we would be losing great talent, but I would also wish them well because they're so fabulous and we feel so good about them that it's okay with us. I can also tell you that we recently were interviewing candidates for a job. And one of the candidates was really incredibly impressive, did not decide to come here. But I will tell you that when that individual interviewed here, you would think that we were the very, very first choice. They did a great job. And even though that person didn't come to work here, I will always think well of that person and will look forward to running into them and watching his career as he goes forward. So he left us with that impression. So that's what you can do.
Kellen, I just want to add a little bit to that. So whether it's that you're interviewing with multiple firms or you have an internship with one firm and you're thinking about not returning to that firm, what I want you to think carefully about, Kellen, is what's the, we talk a lot about first impressions. I want you to think about last impressions. What's the impression that you left with that firm in that interview? Were you professional? Were you respectful? When you go on from that interview and you have your next interview, are you respectful in what you say about the first firm? Things get around. And so if you're positive and respectful in every interaction and you leave the people at that firm, like this candidate left Nancy with, a great impression, door's always going to be open.
The other thing I'll add to that is having had a number of people resign under my watch in various capacities, if you start to feel like you are going to make someone angry by leaving, that probably reinforces your decision to leave. Richard talked about the importance of culture. And my goal was always to have people that were so talented that they had a lot of options. And we still have that same philosophy here at the Robbins School. We want to have faculty that are so good that the top universities are going to try to poach them. That's a good place to be in. Just the burden is on us to make sure we remain competitive for that kind of talent. So a good manager is not only focused on bottom line performance, but they're also focused on helping their own subordinates develop. So they're prepared for promotions, ideally internally, but anywhere where they might find them.
When we all graduate and go out to the workforce, obviously we're going to not know everything about the job we're in, so we're going to need to do a lot of learning. What's the most professional way of asking for help without bugging other coworkers? Because I volunteer at a medical clinic. I'm a business major. I have no idea what half the stuff is, and it seems silly to keep asking other coworkers, like every 5 minutes, what does this mean, what does that mean? So what's the most professional way of going about that?
Sure. So I'm gonna repeat a little bit of what Steve talked about. You remember that when Steve gave his talk, he talked about the fact that when you ask a question, show that you've done your research. So if I'm your colleague, you can ask me as many questions as you want, but I want to know that you made some attempt to find the answer on yourself, and I want to make sure that you don't ask me the same question over and over again. And so, to use Richard's term of, the ism, right? Show that you're impacted by the desire to prepare. Show that you're impacted by the desire to be your best. And be respectful of your colleagues' time. And if you do that, and if you're in the place with the right culture, your colleagues will be absolutely delighted to help you as often as you need.
I'll just add one thing real quick. If you think about projects you have assigned in class, I know the way I design some projects that I do is that I intentionally don't give a lot of direction at first, because part of the learning is to learn how to recognize, as I tell my students, look, there's one person in this room that knows more about the project than anybody else and knows exactly what I'm looking for. That's me. And so you've got to learn how to get that information. So part of the assignment is the tacit assignment is to learn how to ask questions. I'm not going to just tell you what to do. I'm not just going to give you the answer. But if you're able to come with reasonable questions, you've done some research and you say, I've done this and this and this, yet I'm still having difficulty with this, and it appears to me that, and you've obviously done your homework, then I'm more than willing to help. And I think that's where we all are. So recognize that you're already getting opportunities to do exactly what you're doing. It doesn't have to wait for an internship. I know you've asked a question about a very specific incidents, but it doesn't have to work for an internship or a job. You're getting that exposure right now. You find that you've got colleagues, classmates, team members that know other things. You need to learn how to pull from them as well. It's one of the things that, especially in the MBA program, you bring students in from a variety of backgrounds, and they learn more from each other. But it's about learning how to get that information out. So you're going to have lots of time to practice that while you're in school.
I'd like to pose a question to you all. There were, I think, 110 or 111 who RSVP'd for this. I haven't done a count, but my best guess is at least 3 or 4 didn't show up for a section on professionalism. What would be your guidance to us about how we or you or collectively all of us should deal with instances like that? If you were going to draw up a plan for how we communicate or what we communicate to those 3 or 4, what elements would be in your message?
We have their emails. We can send this.
You've got to embrace questions like that if you're as committed as we are to a culture shift. It's not a huge dramatic, we're not in a time of crisis as far as professionalism goes, but if we're going to take it from here to here to here, then, and this is a sincere question, I mean, we might all have ideas about how to deal with it. I know Shelley Burns has had to deal with the Q camp, so we have some practice on this. But this is an opportunity for you to guide us. You care about this topic.
I don't think that it should necessarily be that you guys are chasing them up. If they didn't come here, then that's kind of, I mean, I'm here for a learning experience. If they didn't come here, then that's what they're missing out. And I think that that's, they're missing out. So.
Okay. Yes, sir.
I think professors as a whole need to emphasize the importance of professionalism. So throughout the class, I know in like 2 of my business classes, professors mentioned it and said that they would highly recommend us to attend. And if I feel that if the professors give an incentive as well, that the students will have more reason to attend the programs.
Okay. Yes.
Just going up what my classmate said, I agree. I've had several professors that will even, if a student is not prepared, is clearly not prepared, can't answer a question that they really should be able to answer, or, they're texting or being unprofessional in class, that they'll actually ask the student to leave class and not come back. And, that while that's a little extreme, like, I do appreciate the professors that I've had that have emphasized that culture of professionalism and treating your class like a job.
And so I think that's something that as a student I appreciate out of my professors, because I think it goes outside of the learning environment into the workplace as well.
Well said. Yes, sir.
I think in the past month or two, I've attended more speeches than I have in my whole 2 years here. And from what I learned is that in the past, missing out on those speeches, when professors didn't get in class, I highly recommend going to those speeches than me not going. I missed out opportunities where I learned information that was highly applicable to the real life, the real world. And that's the most important thing, I think, in the school, is that we have professors that try to create situations for us where we can come into a hall and not only just learn from the classroom, but be able to apply the information that we learn. So I think for people that didn't go to this, the only way they'll realize is when they see the people that have went here, when they start speaking and holding conversations about information that they extracted from this on a different level, and they'll show that they have a different understanding of the subject and just the concept of going to the real world, other than compared to just knowing a subject and that's all. So, yeah.
Yes, sir.
And I also feel like, for example, you guys speaking, I really enjoy like the personal stories, like how professionalism was used in your past job. Or I really enjoy that. I feel like if you made those speeches more about that and sort of told the students that we're going to set examples of what we did with this professionalism outside of the business school. And because I feel students think, oh, it's just going to be a bunch of boring professors talking about talking about just like idealistic views of professionalism. I just feel like if it was made more apparent that we can apply this to the real world, here are some personal experiences, that people would turn out more. And
Yeah, the first part of my speech, the first edition of my speech was really going to be about choices we've made and choices you've made. And one of the choices we've made, you came here 2 or 3 years ago, you and I are here, Jonathan 3 or 4 years ago, Steve 6 or 7 years ago, of course, you were the dean 2 years ago. There has been, under Nancy's leadership, a real focus on getting professors who, frankly, are equipped with those stories, right? And we've got a lot of wonderful faculty, some of whom can call on the kind of experience that you heard about from these four. And that matters to us as part of what I'm trying to say. So we hear you loud and clear. Appreciate that. There was a hand here. Sorry.
And Maria brought up something about the personal aspect being something that really makes an impact on us during talks like this. And going back to what you were saying, as far as dealing with students that didn't show up and said they were going to commit to coming here. At times, like, I don't like being called out, like, in class if it's obvious that I was unprepared. I don't like being personally, like a teacher calling me out for it. But those are the times where I remember that and learn from it and work for it in the future. So if I didn't show up to this today and I had signed up for it, and I received an email from any one of you saying personally, like, with my name at the top, just saying, like, we really missed out that you weren't here, just remember in the future that we planned for you to be here, like, that would make such an impact on, like, my attendance to events in the future. So, not saying to call out people specifically, but that anytime something's made more personal, we don't feel so anonymous, that it really does change my behavior. So.
Thank you for that. Additional comments or questions on any topic? Questions for everybody?
Going off what your question was about, promoting professionalism in the B school, I guess, on campus regularly. A lot of people have said about calling out in class, you guys like to do that a lot. And I think it's a good thing, but I think it's also, if you're going to ask questions, make sure that if somebody doesn't know the answer, you just try and help them find the answer and move along, because obviously I haven't been in like a professional, organization. I'm not working at a company. But I'm sure that in the real world, you're going to have times where you're going to be on the spot, feel really uncomfortable. But if a professor just moves on, that's not teaching you how to be professional under pressure. It's teaching you how to, get embarrassed and then hope that he moves on, he or she moves on.
Yeah, I have taught at a number of schools, and one of the things I love about the University of Richmond is that we have these small class sizes. And it's my belief that these small class sizes lead to different people, that you end up a different person, more confident, more capable, more poised, much better job candidate because you have been called out in class. But your point's a very good one. When we call you out on class, it's not to embarrass you. It's rather to make you participate in your own learning and to be front and center. You know, you could have chosen to go to a school that had classes with 500 students and you would be able to get away with never being called on, never participating. You chose to come to the University of Richmond, and I hope that means that you value some of what you're able to do, that you are able to participate in that learning experience. So it's not to embarrass you, it really is to try to help you learn, but your point's a very good one, that when we do that, we should think about the lessons that we can continue to provide you. Thank you.
The only thing I'll add is that one of the ways to avoid potentially awkward situations, especially since nobody has total recall of everything, is engage. When a question is asked, be the first one to answer. If it's something you know, let me know you know it. And then as we keep going on, as I'm thinking, who am I going to put on the spot? I don't want to hear from this one again. I'm calling up Frederick. So get engaged, and the professors will certainly appreciate that.
One or two more questions? Any suggestions for us? Well, I will turn to my colleagues to see if any of them want to offer a final comment. Otherwise, what I'm going to do is encourage you to engage us in how we might continue this conversation down other paths. We concocted this because we thought it might be of use to some of you if there are other programs that we can build. By all means, suggest them and we can to accommodate that. Thanks very much for coming out this afternoon. Really appreciate it.